Alright, 나 동화 미디어바 인자가 동화 세고 고레스. 근데 대화 먼저 되어봐 인자인데 대화 주고 고레스 그러다. 당한도 동화 세들라 먼저 넘기 다 동화 세규에 동화 차와두지 동화 세도 동화 숨쉬게 그러다 동화 세야 먼저 넘기 수고를 내나서다 되는 저 녀아디 동화지. 다딩한 저기 하고 고래. 다 규에 동화 세야 돼. 저기 지게 제모 제바이나다 칼라저 사나 가르사나 디니기 토네 먼저 소화 대화실에 지어와 디소가 대화돼 먼저 규에 동화를 해서 그러와 당저 지당 아주 지대나 대화하고 그러와 이내당 아주 낭비 최내 시행도 될이야 규에 동화를 해서 내가 중세 대화 지어야 돼 아니야 규르실 남사 디젤이야 안 동화리고래 디인자 콜라야 민규에 동화서 나더니 내가 네가 영역이 때인디가 relab나 다 차와두지 동화해야 되지. 세상을 주기 수기 풍보에 차와두지 동화를 했다디 네 수기 풍보에 여바 인장 델라티네 동화 용어를 규의 동화 용어를 해서 전산다 차와두지 동화디 다 땡이 용보 동화기 조어다 차와두지 동화해야 되지. 당한들이 동화시티 같은 거 손으로 와다.
Good evening. All of us are the same in wanting to be freed of pain and misery and not to experience any suffering at all. And in order to achieve such a state, we need to both eliminate unwanted suffering and achieve or cultivate the causes that will lead to lasting happiness. Suffering can be understood according to different ways that it can be divided. The most common is the threefold division: the suffering of physical and mental pain, the suffering of transient happiness, and the suffering of all-pervasive suffering. With these three types, the first type is what we generally recognize: mental unhappiness, physical discomfort, across all its gradations, is what is understood in the world as suffering. The second type of suffering, though, the suffering of transient happiness, is actually what in the world is called happiness or pleasure. It's the experience or the feeling of happiness or pleasure that in the world is considered happiness, for example, when eating a delicious meal. But from the perspective of Buddhism, worldly happiness is not considered the happiness that we are striving for because it's so transient, it's fleeting. And moreover, it's included within the realms or the divisions of suffering because it leads to our confusion growing and our desire for worldly pleasures never being satiated but growing instead. And then the third type of suffering, that of all-pervasive suffering, this actually refers to our physical and mental aggregates because our body and our mind is the basis upon which suffering is experienced. And as long as we have a body and mind that is in the very nature of suffering, we will continue to suffer.
Nyomo palatini kigore se de ngana subu de ha gyudi garse le da nyomo palatini kigore se zo da le da nyomo kigore se dine inza da ko chawa du ju dunga se du le da nyomo be ongi chawa inza ani ko kolya dunga ya le ya rang me ba dunga nyong ko li go ba da gyun yue ba de zen ko min chawa du ju dunga le da nyomo ongi ju phumbo inza de la min chawa du ju dunga se Chapa labdi leda nyumu ju pungpodi gawala yorosane pene nga ju nyawa dan dundro dan mi dan la dan ini samden sukham dan sumbeya kham sedi desuki pungpodi kiyene leda nyumu ju pungpore chesan dine za nga ju leda nyumu ju pungpodi kham sumgala kyab deba inza de leda nyumu kewa yusege chasangala kyab deba inza kyaba duji dungalare 나도 동아다 규에 동아 되게 근데 야 감고말이야 요 말에 매와서 그 동아 차바시고 마땅하죠 레다 녀모에 주 공부들 근데 차바듯이 동아라도 감숨가리야 찹되어 봐 인자 예리 봐 인자 차바듯이 동아스로
As long as we have these physical and mental aggregates, as long as we have these physical and mental aggregates that we currently have, we will continue to suffer because these are the basis upon which suffering is experienced. And these physical mental aggregates that we have, these came about in dependence on causes, in particular, contaminated karma that was accumulated under the influence of afflicted minds. So these are the causes. Contaminated karma ripens into these physical mental aggregates. That karma was accumulated under the influence of afflictions. And as long as we have these physical mental aggregates, we will continue to suffer. We will have no freedom over our situation. Unwanted suffering will continue to befall us. We will not have freedom from suffering. And who is it that is in this pitiful situation that we find ourselves, whereby all suffering experiences continue to fall upon us one after the other? Well, this pervades all humans, as well as those in the low realms, such as animals, spirits, and in the hells, as well as in those in the upper realms of the gods, whether desire realm gods, form realm gods, or formless realm gods. As long as a being continues to take uncontrolled rebirth in samsara, they will suffer. And the reason for taking uncontrolled rebirth is due to being under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions. So therefore, as long as one is reborn in samsara, one will continue to suffer. To express that differently, as long as one remains under the control of one's own afflicted minds, one will continue to suffer.
chakwa nyomo bakye chakwa la tene ane jiglu je dela tene nga zu lu ti tubarwa tene za that nga de pameni ki ane penju chape ki decha nyomo ba di gyujene gyuji jigore ane nga zu ki kewa nga ma ki nga zu ki ta nga zu ki la nga zu ki nyomo ba nga zu phumbo dubye ki nyomo ba shiore seba da lemba se de selin seba da lemba si nyomo ba re on disu ki nyomo ba je 아니 gelatinis kiwar dinenza tangaz nyomo balatini kiwar SIDC ora
These our body and our consciousnesses, these aggregates are as long as we have these, we will suffer, and that's because of the causes they came from. And the causes are karma, contaminated karma, which is accumulated under the influence of afflictions. In this life, this particular body, where did it come from? So to be more specific then, comes from a fertilized egg. So our parents, who slept together under the influence of attachment, led to the egg being fertilized, and we were born. So that's one stream of causes that led to our rebirth in this life. And so there you have the affliction in the continuum of each of our parents out of attachment, which led to the egg being fertilized, and in this way we achieve this body. And then the other stream of causes relates to our karma accumulated in previous lives. So in previous lives we accumulated karmic imprints, and at the time of death in our previous life, our afflictions of craving and grasping served to ripen a particular karmic imprint on our continuum. And that, coming together with the other stream of the led to our consciousness entering into the fertilized egg, and rebirth was taken.
nga sebi nga zo nga sa samnos ligoro nga sa nga zo yak garche na da bo nga sa ligore nga zo ki chawa chibna da bo nga sa sam ligore 디비기 디버스 제발에 따고 가서 삼리고 제사가 세 삼로 실리고와 제사다 가서 세베 삼다이 되가라 나서 삼로 들이야 나 삼다이 나 세디 강라이 규단 진 뢰파샤발라 마도 코롱원이 줍도 여바시 능고래 나와나시 디오레 셈베 짐바디 기용을 데네 요레 셈베 삼로디 기고래 데라 다센 마릭바스 텐제 마릭바스 오라 다네가 좀 요모베기 코와게 유조조 자와디 지레다 당보 디기고래 다센 텐제 마릭바스 기고래 안디 차외 제라 아나 갈리거선 띵이 세 삼로 실리고다 네 세베 나이와레 미네 다 냐 덴버주바 집에 텐진지 기고래 나이와스 딩이데 심바 당보 이데 당보 나젠비게 나라 미네 나 덴버주바 집에 텐진지 기 디제라 나이와 젠비기 아니 나이와레 미네 아니 나 덴버주바 텐진지 기고 텐진이데 당보 이데 심바 이데 디기고다
Contaminated karma, we've heard, was accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. But let's look at how this process works. The starting point that ends with the accumulation of contaminated karma, the starting point is our own sense of self, our sense of I. And here, they have this thought of I, and the I appears to the mind as being truly existent, which means it appears as if it is independent, that our I is not dependent on anything. It is independent. It's not influenced by causes. It doesn't require imputation by mind. So this is naturally how our sense of self appears to us. And we grasp at this. We have a consciousness of ignorance that grasps at this appearance of self, this inherently or truly existent self, grasps at it, believing that this is how the self exists. And immediately following this appearance of a truly existent I that is grasped at, there is the thought of what belongs to that I, the sense of mind. So there's an I and a mind. And this too is grasped at. So these two, the I and the mind, are together the root cause from which the whole process follows.
소주에 성비 추름 삼다면 이 심전세 소주에 세야지 소서 자오긴 지매 선배기 다 되니게 소주에 제기 되니게 냥아다 되니게 갑려바나 당기 심전세 소주에서 자오긴 지매 선배 삼로지게도 갑로 데레위에 삼로 될이야 디 삼로 시어와 디 삼로 디념도 셈중 셈바세야 지어도 중앙서 초와 두시에 셈바 일라지브라 바세도 군정알이고래 지단 디콜 념도 셈바세야 지어와 디 셈바딩 아주기 레레 달레 개와치마 데니게 삼로 숙천보지 레나 라 개와치마 미기에게 사번제 미기에게 규제다 사번디레 레시고 미기에게 레디레 딜레 맞아 딜레다 숙체 줘봐이나 야 누베체 줘봐이나 삼로디 숙체 줘봐이나 디 개와치마 베네데 제가 되벨하 하게게 레사 올려차고 다 디레디 데니기 semja soksa saugin chingme sambege dine sungbege churimdida chungdengi semja sembadi danga jogi gewa chimage gege lesa dine chungo sungo le de dire da savan mason dire.
In this process, the root cause right at the beginning is this appearance of I as being truly existent and grasped at by consciousness as existing in the way that it appears, then accompanied by the sense of mind, what is seen as belonging to this truly existent self. So this then is the root cause of all the karma we will accumulate, both virtuous and non-virtuous. So this sense of self-grasping, this consciousness of self-grasping, this accompanies all streams of thought, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. When there is then the following thought that I will not kill, for example, I will not kill animals, I make the commitment that I will not take life. This is a virtuous thought, the promise not to kill. It is preceded by the thought of I and mine, and then the virtuous thought of I will not kill. This determination not to kill is intention. Amongst the 5 omnipresent mental factors, it's the third, that of intention. And this is karma. This is karma. The mental factor of intention is karma. And the stronger this thought or this consciousness of intention, the stronger the karma. In other words, then, if the determination not to kill is heartfelt, then a powerful karmic imprint is accumulated. If the thought is just fleeting, then still a virtuous karmic imprint is accumulated, but it's going to be weak. The stronger the imprint, the stronger the potential to lead to a good rebirth as a human or God. If the imprint is weak, then the potential to lead to a good rebirth is proportionately weak. So this then, we see here that we have, starting with I and mine, then we come to, and that is grasped at as by self-grasping. Then comes a particular thought of an intention, which is the karma. In this case, it's virtuous. I will not kill. And this then leads to a virtuous karmic imprint, that thought on consciousness.
Andi le de le kewi le sigoro da le de kewi le yang zo la da mi go phong twa ke sabon le zan de le mi kewi le sigoro da.
That is an illustration of virtuous karma, a virtuous karmic imprint that has been accumulated, and should it ripen as a propelling karma into a rebirth at the time of death, it will lead to a rebirth in one of the upper migrations as a human or God.
Nandene yang chi dangbo nga sam de dene nga jimbe nga da sin de chi demba du ba jimbe de nga jimba chi ngi sa dene ngi semje de sokju gi se be ya ji yong ro da ngi sui gi se be samlo sho ro ba dene gi semje ngi sui gi se be samlo de la kunlo ni yong ro da bo dangbo da sui gi se be kunlo chi gi ro di gyu kunlo si ge da semje de sui shin be kap la semje nga so su ge sui be ge jawa chi sui shin be ge la ka chi le sui shin be kap de ya semje sui gi se be samlo kunlo chi ro samlo chi ro ba o samlo de dang chung den gi da de ji semju semba chi ro ba cho wa du ji semba yi la ja ba nga yu be na de de semba sia de semba di da nga so ki wa le sa di cha ko da le Ni suigin sawa. Dene kunlo rwa di. Yu kunlo se ora. Da dene semje suibe kabla, da ngi semje suigin sebe samlo se kunlo yu kunlo se ora. Dene da semje suibe jawa che shimbe nekap su ngi suigin sebe samlo se ora. De dang chunden gi semje semba de la da le migi we le se ora da di nga so ki le di re da di migi we le. De migi we di le de.
That was an illustration then of the accumulation of virtuous karma. Now for non-virtuous karma, the process is the same. It's a thought of I and mine, grasped at by a consciousness of self-grasping, grasping that this is how the self exists independently. And then comes the thought, I will kill. So previously it was virtuous, I will not kill. Now it's a non-virtuous thought, I will kill. And this is the same mental factor of intention amongst the 5 omnipresent mental factors, and this is the accumulation of karma, I will not kill. It's also called the motivation, especially when then it is acted upon. And then there is an act of killing. Then again, with the act of killing, non-virtuous karma is accumulated, a non-virtuous karmic imprint is accumulated, and should that ripen, it ripens into rebirth in the lower realms.
Ojezanda aranjuge chetele denige samda denishide ta gewele sagar mikivele jezang aranjuge ine gewele denige le mongbo kiwa le sayore mikivele sagorwa denis yorwa ta denige sa cheve chela anda dadi lamsa gewele di le lamsa bacha asati bacha ngo gyurugora ko bacha ngo gyurugor le kol kasane legadi bene semjen sochu chasona de semju sembad yomarwa ko bacha ngo gyurugor ni gore jesa du shine ne ta yebare 당한 저게 다디래 되네 가서 레 먹고 살고와 되네 레산 되네 균ing부 저 당한 저 디젤다 녀몽 받대 가서 마릭 파세디 당버자위 마릭 파세 줘다 레세 줘리 개와 가서 개와 레 세디 줘서 다 제마 가르치고선 다 디제 제로는 그디네 대시로 지디 갑려야 안 가지고 지게 초화지 용거를 가서 시 지게 다 아주 시설에서 비 초화실이거로 디급수 다들 안에 초화 대화를 비기 동아 가서 세바지야요 세바지기고래 되네게 세바셔야돼 다디 지당 바라디와 되샤가 좀 지자라라 차배 차바다 미펀준 차배 차바기고래 디 차바디게 가가래 당아주 띵데 야라규 마 코와레 깨원에 얘기 세바셔야디 당아주 시로지디 갑라 다소소기 that 즉 소화지질에 미비게 차바지기고래 세바지 되샤지기고래 내라 세바하시고래 디 세바디기 가르치고서는 되네게 세바디기 가르치고서는 마주 대진야마 레기 사제 바샤샤저 니버 수미에게 탑시고래 지난 되네게 세바파 숙체저도 되네게 레기 냐마 바샤시기 니버 수미야기 니버로지 따따레디가 델라 렘바시고래 녀모바 디야 되샤래 렘바지 된 세바 렘바디 니기고래 디니데 바제네 안디니기디 가르치고서는 나 레기사 바샤 잡아디 양자수 누버도 수규르시네 레세 시바세데 민 시발라고 다 거기와 치마기 개와 치마기 더 류디 두비에 바토기 류디 두비에 누버 용수 조바시 레디고래 이리고래 델레 시바시고 제가 세바 렘바 시바신 디숨디 고 림바시네 제네 고 뒤수치라리고 대신 아주 마릭바다 레세데 한치 사사회질에 디숨 말에 빠르다 로망고요 가시 갑레는 로직이 용 가진 갑레는 다와징 갑레는 남산시와 인고로 갑레는 로싱아 로주종아 니슈숨중 없이 죽주마시와 균우디 바라를 균디네 용으로 제사되네 당보 아주 마릭바시야지 되네 레사 안디 제라 아니 세바다 렘바 시바숨세데 규스 디스 숨디샤사워 제사 디 나 가소레 죽어래 죽 디죽디라 내가 저기 코와게 유튜브 싸워 디래다 소외 것이면 그래 소와 지리기 되지 소와들레 착배 끼고 그래서 대 착바들레 민가 세발라 그래야지 네 소라세라 대 샘중 소와지 리고를 소소라 미신 그런 지금 미들레 고시로지 소와지 리고를 소와레도 되는 소와들레 착배 끼고 그래 소와디 착바 말이지 초바 델라 미비 착바 현다시키고 그러지 유래 초바디 유체 델라 미비 착바시키 배나가 저기 bomba라서는 bomba 통에 미세와 끼로 디나지 초와지게 연도 초와들라 착바시키고 그래 되네 닌 착바디 누버 시우 추셔저도 안데 렘바세도 착고래 디젤 시바세도 그래 당보 세바디기 뉴버 처처로도 그래 렘바세 착고래 렘바디 뉴버 처 단 메니게 시바세디 대진이마 레사 레디 바샤샤선 디 바차 수민제 뉴버 양자 레용오 쉐바지고 레지고 유고 수 뉴버디 민고래 제레 민요도 민바들 시바시고래
That then, in brief, is the process for how karma is accumulated, both virtuous and non-virtuous. When the karma is accumulated, that intention, the mental factor of intention has arisen, the karma has been accumulated, a karmic seed is placed on the continuum, and that can ripen in this life, a few days, a few months, a few years later, but it most usually ripens in future lives, the next life or many lifetimes to come, 5 times, 100 lifetimes from now. So the process then of ripening of that karmic imprint then, especially at the time of death, works in the following way. So one is really at the point of death. And here, the mental factor of feeling tone arises. And this can be a pleasant feeling tone arising from virtue, or an unpleasant feeling tone arising from non-virtue. So that feeling arises of pleasant or unpleasant, and it's held or observed by attachment. Not the usual type of attachment, but here it's the attachment of called craving. So it's held by craving. This then is followed immediately by a stronger form of craving, and that is of grasping. And here we have now a karmic imprint that is ripening. So we have from the feeling tone of virtuous or non-virtuous, or pleasant or unpleasant, that is being first observed or apprehended by craving, then in a stronger way with grasping, and then again with a third mental factor of existence. This then is where the karmic imprint is about to ripen into rebirth. So this is the process at the time of death, for how the karmic imprints how the karmic imprint that is about to ripen into the next rebirth is ripened, or the process for ripening.
당은 저기 이제 유죽시고를 당가 코와를 깨야리 유룩 당보 마릭받지 당보가 저기 나 집에 나래 미네 나 덴버주버지 미팅신기기도 와디 마릭바세 자유규 마릭바디레 다 델레 때는 저기 다 추림 소안에 계획래서 심지어 소지집에 미기외래서 레지 사근도와 심지어 셈바기도 레지 딜레스 니바디치레 디숨바딜라 가르선에 레데파 람상 가리팅도 샤고선 가하치네 남식이 때도 바샤 샤용을 되네 남 바샤 샤사기 시 남바시 남셰디 바차 샤마 타베 남바셰바텔라 남식이 텐데세 텐데 숨바디 숨바디 차고라 다 디숨디 곧 디숨디 ཉel 차고 다 디파라델다 세바데 렘마레바델라 균닝보 유에시게라 가신은 균닝보 용거라 가신 로망보 용거라 가신네 근데 지게 계획이 바로도 쳐봐 용거래 되네 자다 디젤라 가르다 다 림보 숨보조서 디젤라 갈리게스네 세바세다 지게 되네 렘바세다 되네 시바세 디숨디 차고 두고래 시바딩 아주기 싫어지데 우체가라마든 우체바다 시바디 줍산 남상 우체르고 우체서는 언제 시사다 시사네 깨와치마 바르도세 줍고 와다 안주게
This then is the process for how rebirth is taken. First, at some point, with ignorance of true grasping at the I as existing truly, and therefore the sense of mind also following this a sense of true existence, truly existent I, then karma is accumulated. So that is the consciousness of intention, and this can be virtuous or non-virtuous. That's the second step. And then the third is the imprint is placed on consciousness. In the presentation of the 12 links, these are the first three, that of ignorance, that of karmic formations, and thirdly, consciousness. And consciousness is where the karmic seed is placed. Then there's a duration of time between the accumulation of that karmic imprint and its ripening, usually over many lifetimes. And then at that point of death, the next three of the 12 links ripen. There is first craving, then grasping, and then existence or becoming. So here in this process, right at the time of death, a mental factor of feeling tone ripens, of either virtue or non-virtue. This then is the ripening of the karmic imprint, and this is held or apprehended first with craving, and then as it grows in strength by grasping, and then existence. And then at that point, breath stops, and the life leaves the body, and one leaves this rebirth and enters into the in-between state, into the bardo.
dine zadan bardo adi dine ko mani da ko kiwa ngazu mili na da ki kewi le ji baina da mi kiwa le baina ko mi kiesa da ka kiesa da ko hapje go da phamani nyamdo nyebu che di gawa du mu de zi ko gidina di zi go re zi ji ko tongyo de dine del pa shu che na dine ngazu gi phamani jawa che del shu che na an 파면이 구타이 제여도 거기 기마데 대슈제 되는 거 저기 수부주에 나 저기 개발된 바데 미리 개발된세 되는 두슬린 거래제.
At the point of death, when breath stops and our consciousness leaves this life, we enter into the next realm or the next life, but we do so via the intermediate state. So between this realm and the next, one enters into the intermediate state. There, one observes one's parents of the next life, drawn to them by our communal karma, our joint karma between themselves and ourselves, and we observe our parents. So we now find ourselves in the intermediate state, about to take rebirth into the next realm.
자, 당아 주기 다두 진행하고 코알 계래 규디 디네치네 안데 규죽 책으로와 지산 디네상 한 주기 세바세데 마기니엘이야 인델이야 이게 찍게 침보래 아주기 베는 한손을 계기 규망보 사베네 디갑이야 세바세디 당은 베는 아주기 시로지디갑라 지게 지게 상기 전바당 현례 편비 삼라 자주 삼다야다 니지로 삼다야다 주소주게 라마로 제야다 최로 기위 자와치 삼노티 코송바이나 코바이나 남사 델미비기 세바세데 기고래 세바데 기위 자와 델미비기 세바데 기고래 지나디 세바디기 디 뉴바디 처르 렘바차 디 렘바 뉴바 처르 차데 아네디 가소레 시바디고래 디 시바디가 기와치마 미다 하게야기 규샤고 미다 할기 고래 지나 세바스 제가 세바디기 믹스 유디라 당보 초와디 개화로시하는 데 직소수기 람마템비기 대하기 된 삼다야다 야 삼야지 상이 대하의 최 삼다야다 야지기 자주 sem사야다 현리 니제 sem배 삼다야다 근데 네게 삼로 개외 삼로지 코송바이나 남사 세바스 기로지디가 개외 삼로 코송바나 남사 세바디 디개와들 미비 세바디 차로고 디 차완자데 디고 세바 뇽몽바레 디 세바 디 마치네 안 지지 렘바세 차 누버슈 쳐르 시비 고 주투에게 누버디게 렘바샤 디니데 되차레 니가 뇽몽바레 다데네 시바세도 고는 주르데 레옹원에리양 바샤게 푸추 주르시네 레옹원에 차고 다베지 디 개와레 다디 고게데 디 인자 개와 치마디게 개와차 밀리기고 야나 할리기고 콜하다 미치기고다 데콘도 덴돌리게 캡르다디 덴디스케베나 마당강선을 끼워 매버려다. 고 시바시디. 시비틴데 시루하다.
Understanding this process, we can see that it's of great importance that at the time of death, one directs one's mind in a virtuous direction. And if one is alongside someone who's passing from this life, to encourage the train of thought in a virtuous direction. So here, depending on one's predisposition, one can call one's Lama to mind, or the Buddha, or generate thoughts of love or compassion. Whatever, some kind of virtuous thought that one has an affiliation with or a predilection towards. And in this way, one is going to ripen a virtuous imprint, and this will be apprehended by craving, and as that grows in strength into grasping, it's apprehended ever more strongly. So these two consciousnesses in the 12 links of craving and grasping, they are both types of attachment. Not what we usually experience in our daily lives, but these particular types of attachment at the time of death. So they are afflictions. Then the third one is that of becoming or existence. This, if the initial imprint was virtuous, then the imprint, the consciousness of becoming or existence, this too is virtuous. Here in this process, one is about to pass from this life through the intermediate state into a upper realm as a human or God, because the consciousness of becoming or existence is virtuous. And it is virtuous because the preceding two afflictions of craving and grasping came about in dependence on a virtuous imprint ripening. Hence, at that point, at the start of this process, it is so important to generate a virtuous consciousness such as love or compassion, or recalling one's Lama or the Buddha, some kind of a technique like that to generate a virtuous imprint, and thereby lead to the attainment of a rebirth in the upper realm as a human or God.
And the Aji Sosuki Jala, the Chapa, Chapa, only Jala, then the Chapa, Chapa, Yen, la Chapa, Chapa, Jala, la Chapa, Chapa, and the Jala, Corona, Condo, the Niki, and Jiggy, that Jiggy, and the Anji Lotaro, Kiva, the Nichubina, Nyomo, but the Nichi Chadaro, Kesovena, Lamsa, Sevadiki, Denis Limipi, Sevadiki, Sevaki. That is this Sevaki, the Sevadiki, Nubacher, the Lembasiki. That lemba dige kare nyuba tingorasne deji ngara jugula migi we legi basha shari basha digi de minje ne ko migi we legi ngo gyurju gore de gyuru ne da kewa chima kawaji orasne nga so le giru gore je.
The same process unfolds should one end up taking rebirth in one of the suffering lower realms. So at the time of death then, should an affliction arise and non-virtue dominate the mind. So for example, anger or attachment for one's possessions or something, or a wrong view. So some affliction dominates. Then craving holds to this, as does grasping ever stronger. And then the non-virtuous imprint in terms of becoming or existence ripens. And now, because the imprint is one of non-virtue, one is propelled into one of the low realms.
On the Nigidang to Kiwachima, Yajike, Gawamili Kevi, Nada, Jigna Sonsi Kiwana, Yan Dindele, Angkor, Yan Korasa, that in the Tuition Yomokia, that Jishan Novakia, the Sobada, Jagivi, Jawajola Sabata, the Nigichin, Angeles, Yadu, Sinokora Hortigors, just like the names and to Korigi. Dunga nyoya kanga chaza di gyudu sia zi de taime tama de la gyuzawa di denzi marikpa nga sosora nga seba nga la mine nga demaru denzi marikpa di setanga zo khowe tsawi gyudi di res chaza nga zo lya dai kasin shebana umba chubana nabo nga ja Dalai shin yuje dagi di jeng la cha ye ba sa de nabo nga shibe nga jinge dene nga yir zimba ge den du sin nyomo ki gore sa da andina jin Andinigi Andushine Ligores, Denza Corvezza, Gudi Carresne, Denzi Marikpares, Denzi Marikpa Mevasio, Pangores, Dima Pampana Koala Tatu Mardi Pangore, Dipa de Gariting Pangoresne, Denzin de Garizingosene, Yudi Nga said Rana Nawa, Nanga de Kabla, Kala Mother Rangun to Banawa, Nashin Takara, some Zindigore. Chesa Zindivadi, Nadi, one year to Hamo, no tree, some daddy order. Chesa called Loshi, Loloshi, no tree. Chesa called Loloshi, no tree, quite Debudilia, Yakushkin, Go Marva.
That then is a process that occurs at the time of death, whether one is going to the upper realms or falling into the lower realms. Then, wherever one happens to be reborn, as we recalling the process of how karma is accumulated, immediately one starts accumulating karma. There's always this thought of I accompanied by mine, and appearing as truly existent, grasped at by consciousness as existing in this way, and then comes intention, the accumulation of karma, thoughts of either virtue or non-virtue, and the karma is continued to be accumulated. What we see here then is that the accumulation of karma, the thought of intention, follows from a consciousness that grasps at the self as existing in a way that it does not. So therefore this consciousness is a wrong consciousness. It's an ignorance, because it grasps at the self as being independent, when the self is not independent, but rather dependent on causes and imputation and so forth. So therefore, the start of this process is governed by the affliction of ignorance. And therefore, whatever follows that, even if it's thoughts of virtue and therefore virtuous karma is accumulated, that process started with ignorance. Hence, whether the karma that is accumulated is virtuous or non-virtuous, it's contaminated by the afflictions. And this contaminated karma is karma, it will lead to a repeated, uncontrolled rebirth in cyclic existence. Here, when we look at that process in detail, we'll see we don't have control over that yet. We have no freedom. The arisal of ignorance that grasps at the self as existing in a way that it does not, it's not something we do with intention. It's not something we can turn off and on like a light switch. Hence we have no afflictions. Hence we have no freedom. We are overwhelmed by the afflictions, whether we are accumulating virtuous or non-virtuous karma. And here again, remind ourselves of the verse from Chandakirti. Beings think I at first and cling to the self. They think of mine and are attached to things. So this shows the whole process starts with I and mine and be grasped at as existing in the way that they appear by ignorance. And then we accumulate karma, and whether it's virtuous or non-virtuous, it's pervaded by the affliction of ignorance. And therefore, through this process, starting with the wrong consciousness, the karma we accumulate is contaminated, and therefore the results are not free of contamination.
Andine zadang arjunga nga se kisin sheba na jinga zo tongba nga se di rala na na jinga de kawa de phumbe de do na shebe de do karu do jeba cheche kaya nye manye ba jeba china kaya manye be tongsa ji ngo to ba ina de nga se di ra shin ngone di ngo ngone ra shin ngone de ha go wa de je sa ra shin tongba ni to be lo de ge yong ge so di ge ya de shi nga ra shin ju ba jin be lo di 고 가르고 그래서 권이 도쇼로와 근데 차와다 매니디 차와다 장문이도 도쇼이다 차고 싶으잖아 장문 매와 차고래 난 장문 차선 차와다 매와 차로가 디나시 동반이라 나 세와 라시 모토보 토벨로디 기요데 나 라시 주버 짐베데 도르 가루 거래 지나 데네 인자 디가서나 나 라시 주버 짐베 나진 가서바나 데네 녀모바 기야메 바로 녀모바 기야메 레사 메바 Lesa men then call Gyalim Bamere. Call a Gyalim Bamena, Dunganyo Marechide. Cisadini, Dushine. That's a week in your mobile, Casana to Shevanashi, Stantas Maribare, Tisan Dika Hores, Timeba Sovala, Na rushing to Tombani Dogore, said the Kissing Tanga, Tombani or Chebacheta to shed, Kissing Shed, Dara did that and that.
Now I want to link back to what we looked at in detail last week. Because having seen now the process by which we continue to take uncontrolled rebirth in the suffering realms of cyclic existence, that even our virtuous karma is contaminated by the affliction of ignorance, and therefore that even our experiences of happiness, worldly happiness, these have come about in dependence on causes that themselves are also influenced or pervaded by the afflictions. Linking back then to last week, when we've seen this process of suffering and the accumulation of causes for suffering starts with ignorance. It is ignorance that is the root cause of all suffering, and therefore it's the ignorance of self-grasping that needs to be eradicated. This ignorance that grasps that phenomena as existing in a way that they appear, despite not existing in this way at all. And the technique for identifying this was presented in detail last week. And it's through that one cultivates the wisdom that realizes the emptiness of true existence. So all phenomena, everything we think about, appears to us as being truly existent, as being independent. When we meditate in the way described last week, we come to see that no phenomenon exists truly. No phenomenon exists by way of its own essence or nature, but is empty of existing by way of its own essence or nature. And this is how one comes to realize emptiness and sever this stream of connection of accumulating contaminated karma. The wisdom realizing emptiness and the ignorance of self-grasping are completely contrary minds. Just like hot and cold, one cannot be both hot and cold together. As one gets hotter, cold will decrease, or as the cold increases, heat decreases. Similarly, as one develops wisdom, ignorance dissipates. When one realizes emptiness directly, one severs this ignorance. And under the influence of the wisdom realizing emptiness, afflictions do not arise. And as we develop the wisdom within us, afflictions also will weaken in the initial stages. So this is the technique we need to engage in, so as to initially weaken the ignorance of self-grasping and eventually eradicate it completely. This is how freedom is achieved.
ye me na dongsang jingwo dongsang ngo che go dongsang si dongba ni se de la nga rashi nga dongba ni se nga dongba ni ngi ting dongba ni se che sa nga de da shin ji be chen na nie me ba de na nga de yo ma re be se ne nga yo re sin ni gan de yo re sin ne nga zu phung bo le pa lue pa da ba zhen bi gu yo re che sa nga zu phung bi ngo le lo so yo ma re phung bo de jing a jie de phung bo le ngo ta de lo so rang ngwen de zhe jing go re de ne yo ma che sa phung bi ngo le lo so yo ma re che sa lue phung bo la phung bo nga bo ga le pa lue pa da ba zhen bi yo ba re yo re nga de me ba ma re nga yo re ga de yo sen xian ji le phung bo le dui ne lue pa da ba le dui ne yo ba re ma do de ne ge ga ma de ba de yo ma re
In meditation, we investigate and analyze first how the self appears and then does it exist in the way that it appears or not. Come to see that it appears to us as being independent, not influenced by anything at all. Then we investigate and we see that no such self can be found. It doesn't exist. The self does not exist at all. But then we think a little further. What doesn't exist is the self that appears spontaneously to consciousness, the truly existent self. That is what doesn't exist at all. But the self, though, does still exist. There's someone sitting, thinking, reflecting. How does it exist then? Because what's clear now is the self that appears to us, this truly existent self, that does not exist at all. An independent self does not exist at all, but rather a dependent self. This exists, a self that is dependent on imputation by mind onto the physical and mental aggregates. That mere self exists, not an inherent self, not a self that exists by way of its own nature or its own essence. That self has been sought and cannot be found at all. No independent self can be found, rather a dependent self, a self that is dependent merely on imputation by mind onto the physical and mental aggregates.
풍보 la pa da ba de lue pa da ba ki kun zu yue ba ji zan nga khoro rang xin dong ba yi de ba ma zhu ba rang nga khoro kun zu yue ba de ji zan de kun zu dian ba ni yi dian ba ni se dong ba yi de dong nam de ba si go kun zu de ba de kun zu dian ba kun zu yue ba kun zu dian ba si go ji zan dian ba ni de de ga che go le mo la dian ba ni nga de la ji zan din na ji dang a zu ge chue gan de ji ne 却感觉是那个让心点嘛嘛住吧， ane korong che korong ane pa lue pa da ba zhen de ba lue pa din de da ba zhen yue ba gun du de yue ba le se chi.
In the meditation then, at the conclusion, one comes to realize that the self is empty of true existence, empty of existing by way of its own nature or essence, does not exist in the way that it appears. And this is the realization of wisdom. Through the wisdom realizing emptiness, one realizes the self does not exist truly. And this is the realization of the ultimate truth. Thereafter, the final step in the meditation is one recognizes, though, that whilst the self is empty of true existence, there is a conventional self, the self that is merely imputed by mind onto the aggregates. That is the conventionally existent self. There is no ultimately existent self. The self is empty of true existence. That is the ultimate truth. The conventional truth here is that there is a conventionally existent self, not an ultimately existent self, conventionally existent self, which is the self that is merely imputed by mind onto the aggregates. So here, at the conclusion of the meditation, one realizes the two truths in relation to the self. The ultimate truth, that the self is empty of inherent existence, and the conventional truth, that the self exists conventionally, but as a mere imputation by mind onto the basis of the physical and mental aggregates.
그래서 나랑 주게 셈 라신 템바마 라신디 라신 템바마 주바 템바주베 동베 동바니 동바레 나랑 주게 라신 셈디 라신 셈게 라신 템바주베 동베 동바레 지사다 상기기 셈디야 라신 템바주베 동베 동바레 딩일에 캬바 찌가요 말 집이 찌겨래 나랑 주게 셈게 라신 동바니 데다 상기기 셈게 라신 동바니래 캬바 찌야메 집이 찌겨래 다 가르쳐봐 요러스네 나랑 주기게 셈게 라신 데다 상이랑 캬바 가르 요러라나 베네 나랑 주게 셈게 라신디 묘모바 되샤 콩로 아니 묘모바다 묘모베 바샤다 묘모베 사보나 망보지기 dum되게 지금 고 dum되요래 제가 고 라신 오 라신 데모마 주바디 야고시우 진배네 될야 묘모바게 되차다 콩 묘모베 사본다 묘모베 바차다 묘모보 코로지파 dum되제 안디 가저이 나로기디 뭔도 두고 말해 다 산지기디 셈게 라신디 묘모베게 다 데니게 돈에 바지 묘모바다 묘모베 바샤 사본나 제가 차자 장모서서 장모 장자 차대로 장모 장예대로 받아 통디고로 봐 어디 되네시 변나가 주기 셰광 그신 빼자바나지 셰광 까고 가자 왜 되니 이여봐 찍부지게 봐체 찍디다 벤 찍조 나보 다바라 주야다 찍주 된마레기 디가랴 찍 타바 다마라 땀 되네게 파tum샤바이나 찍디 꿰매바도 샤샤바네 파다네 찍딩 아주 파다도 빼왜 되니 통해야 되나 셰고 코로나도 비치로로 외쳐도 외팅딩이 차 외쳐 차들 디사지게 셈디다 셈게 라시 셈나 찍바래 당 알아 주게 셈디 때 라신텔라 빼 외팅디 여바래데 셰고나 여바 셰고도 여바데 셰고디 바 찍게 레다 다바 주야데 쪽보 바 dum디와자 파다네 나호고르신 동거래 난게 세부 통투고 말해 코롱기네 실로 외쳐 저거 말까 나호가시 되죠 그러봐 세상 안에서 셈디 디로시 세상 당 안에 저기 뇨모바디 바두 지나 안에 저기 곰제 지들 뇨모바 바바나 레디네 지금 파티셔게디 파직 파비니 베글글리 바비 차상 마비 서베네 거 아니 야 되서 왜 셔셔셔는 야야야 두고로 봐 차상 장모서는데 되는 상계디다 대시시고 집부대 차고로 집부 차고로 디나시 안에 저기를 뇨모디기나 지자 뇨모바 중우디게 되서 빵이 지도 되는 바 뇨모바 라바라바를 바 차차바 되는 사반디게 바 되는 바세 되는 상계기 셈나 집부지야 차투에 차기레스 지자 안에 저기를 상계기 상계기 뉴바데 안에 저기를 여바래 디라 바세 그래서 뇨모바다 뇨모 바사기 가디어래 제가 디마세고 제가 세야라 뇨모바 메바서야 쪼디다 데니게 셈게 라신 코롱 동바이 또 별로디 다데 디리에사지 가산 디레다 돈달라
So our mind itself is empty of inherent existence. Its nature is empty of inherent existence. The mind of all Buddhas is also completely empty of inherent existence. In fact, the mind of all Buddhas and our own mind, in terms of their empty nature, is identical. There is no difference at all on the ultimate level. However, where the difference is found is that the nature of the mind of an ordinary being such as ourselves is obscured by the seeds of karma and the imprints of those seeds. This obscures the pure nature of our mind. So that is the difference between the mind of an ordinary being such as ourselves and the mind of a Buddha. Their very nature is pure and empty. And there, on that ultimate level, there is no difference at all. But for ordinary beings like ourselves, that pure nature is obscured by the karmic seeds and imprints of the afflictions. And it's this obscuration which prevents us from recognizing the empty nature of our mind. So an analogy I used recently, and I'll repeat again now, is if we were to take two panes of glass, and the one we will liken to the mind of a Buddha, and the other we will liken to our own mind. So both panes of glass are identical. And the one that we're likening to the mind of a Buddha is spotlessly clean and completely translucent. The other, though, when looking at it, it's filthy and dirty. It's dusty, it's got marks on it, perhaps oily cloths. It's really completely obscured. However, the second pane, which is here likened to our own mind, should we diligently apply ourselves to cleaning it, to slowly over time, slowly, gently, and with care, removing each and every mark, piece of dust, oily cloth, slowly, with time and care and diligence, we will clean the second pane, and it will become manifestly clear that it is identical to the first pane, the mind of the Buddha. What needs to be done is just this filth and dirt cleared away. And how does one do so? Slowly, diligently, and with care, primarily through cultivating the wisdom, realizing emptiness. That is the cleaning technique, the technique for removing all the stains and impurities from the mind.
that 동방이 셔럽들이야 돈음도 셔럽도 군소도 셔라 심지기 된제바 또 셔라 세 여와 숨제위 나네다 간주 동방이 또 셔라 세디 기지 돈음도 셔럽들 세거 동방이 또 셔럽라고 그래 나디네 마셔도 군습도 셔럽 세데 다 군습 돈음 동방이 많이 봐 파르 파 지게 샤와 쯤이 위에 그 군습 된 바세데 니 또야게 셔럽되게 셔럽되고 쉬어야 되다든 마
In our text just has a few words here. So just returning to the text at the bottom of page 44, the three divisions of the perfection of wisdom are mentioned. The wisdom that knows the ultimate, which is what we looked at last week. The wisdom that knows the conventional, which is what I'll briefly talk about now. And then there's the third type, the wisdom that knows how to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings.
나 군습도배 셔럽세디 지당한도 동방이 많이 비추 차상로 군습해 다니 데니 추 동방이 많이 비추 간이 도배기 셔럽들라 군습도배 셔럽세지 최고로 군습도배 셔럽 최고래 다 심지 된지배 셔럽세야 군습도배 셔럽 나로 수디고래 유 뭐네 신디 군습도배 셔럽래도요 심지 된지배 셔럽세야 군습도배 셔럽래 군습도배 도배 셔럽도 군습 템바 동방이 많이 비추 차상 군습 템바래 데니 도배 그 동방이 많이 비추 간이 도배네 데니 도배 셔럽들 군습도배 셔럽래다디
The difference between the two is the wisdom that knows every object, any phenomenon that knows anything, is included in the second division, the wisdom that knows the conventional. Everything that can be known is included in the wisdom that knows the conventional, with one exception, which is emptiness. And that is in the first division, the wisdom that knows the ultimate. So the ultimate truth, or emptiness, that is when the wisdom that knows that, or realizes that, is in the first division. The wisdom that knows or realizes anything else that exists other than emptiness is included in the second division.
지단의 셰럽들이야 돈남도 베셰럽세도 군수도 베셰럽니 셰럽디난 뒤살이다. 동방이도 베셰라다 동방이라 셴비게다 최도 베셰럽디 이마도 요말에 군수도 돈남도 베셰라다 군수도 베셰라 이마도 요말에.
Therefore, wisdom can be divided, and often is, into two. The wisdom knowing the conventional, and the wisdom knowing the ultimate. And this includes everything. Everything that exists, that exists and therefore can be known, is included here. And in the first division, the wisdom that knows the ultimate only refers to the realization of emptiness, the wisdom knowing or realizing emptiness, and everything else that exists and therefore can be known is included in the second, the wisdom that knows the convention.
이내 디날이야 예와를 마스 군수도 베셔라다 심증이 된지비도 진 된지바도 베셔라스네 시럽니 카가치네 시월에 송고를 된마.
And here it's divided in this way then, into the first being the wisdom that knows the ultimate, and the second that knows the conventional.
다디 전주심비 냠렌제비기 냠렌제라 시럽 냠렌제 시럽데 송고를 마도 군수도 베셔럽세데 군주베 최 간레시나 또 베셔라 차산 송고 말에 다디디 내가시고 군주도 베셔라세디 전주심바 남기 현기 된 제발라 시럽 가다가다 고고서 군수도 베셔럽세다 셈쟁이 된 제발도 베셔랍스네 시럽 니 용구레에서 송고래 어데 니바도 숨바니데 전주 다디디가서 군수도 베셔라다 셈쟁이 된 제기도 베셔라스 니 이샤도와 디샤바데 전주sem바 남기 현기 된 제발이야 시럽 군수도 베셔럽세다 한 셈쟁이 된 제발도 베셔럽되니기 냠내제 니요레스네 디 군수도 베셔럽세다 되니기 돈나도 베셔라스 니 시고래 제단 디가서 시 군수도 베셔럽세야디 군수베 최간내시나 또 베셔럽라 송고 말에 양 군수도 베셔럽세야디 이 데스크 카하지 캐바와지 송고래.
However, we are in the context of the training of a bodhisattva. Therefore, when we look at the second and third divisions, which are right at the bottom of page 44 and the top of page 45, the wisdom that knows the conventional and the wisdom that knows how to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings, it doesn't refer to all objects of knowledge other than the ultimate, than ultimate truth. It refers specifically to what the bodhisattva trains in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of others.
다 디고서 셰베 군조도 베셔라세디 리베네가라 케베 셰랍시고 리베네가라 케베 셰랍시고 텔레 리베네가라 케베 셰랍세라 군조도 베셔랍시고 리베네가데 카라라워스네 나드엔 리바 텐지 리바 ndariba soariba dinga bodela 리베네가 세고 제산 디 켐비게 셰랍텔라 아니 리베네가라 켐베 셰라세 대 군조도 베셔랍세 디딜 수고다리데.
The second division then of wisdom, the wisdom that knows the conventional, in the context of the trainings of a bodhisattva, refers to the 5 fields of learning, or the more commonly translated as the 5 sciences. So the 5 sciences, or the 5 fields of learning, are firstly knowledge of language, knowledge of logic and reason, knowledge of Buddhism, knowledge of medicine, and knowledge of technical arts.
지단 링닝아 세다 링닝 체왕아다 추왕아 세 링닝 주지에 요래 다디체의 링닝 체왕아들이.
Other contexts one will come across the 5 major fields of learning and the 5 minor fields of learning. That which would make 10, of course. Here, the 5 I've just mentioned are the 5 major fields of learning.
링네 충알라네 닝아 세다 원주 세다 뎁저 세다 Duyakara Sayatan, Gartsi Sayat, Surini Chua Nga Sayat, that this more.
The 5 minor fields of learning will be knowledge of poetry, knowledge of synonyms, art or style of composition, science of external expression, and astronomy and astrology. Those are the 5 minor fields of learning.
Nyamlen Jebala Simjin Dunchewaza, Nandi Ribati Shingu, Nandi Ribala Nanga, Jawa Dida, Jawa Chimala, Gawa Duyang, Lam Rim Text, Jika, shared Chazan Nandi Riba Chawar, Nandi Riba, Gawa Tubiata, Ni, Jimbada, Surin Sube, Nyamlen Jia, and then Gajuan Chansim Komna, Deneki Tanga Riba, Gawa Dilia, and Geshe Tubia, Mombana, Denis Tuya, Dusu said, Shed, Nandi Riba Chawar. 지산 디네기 전주선 반음기 된 나도 리바 마찬 바이나 샹리아 판도 주두고 샹도 샹리 판도 주발라 네 나도 리바 신고 지산 나도 리바 도베 샤랍고 보레지네.
Looking then at the 5 major fields of learning, the first, knowledge of Buddhism, is as we'd expect. Here the Bodhisattva trains in Buddhism, coming to understand what is virtue, what is non-virtue, how to accumulate a virtue, and abstain and purify non-virtue, so as to achieve good rebirths, as well as how to cultivate and bodhicitta initially and how to develop it further and so forth. Knowledge of Buddhism then is quite clear, and the Bodhisattva trains in this so as to be able to be of direct benefit to others and to develop themselves further.
지간속에 다음에 볼 때 공부에 되는 신이 줍다 고시하게 된주 여러와 수림이 걸어야 돼. 두와 두이 걸어와 진짜 되네숨 두에 되는 공부에 되네 되되 되네 숨디 디기 된다 신야다 안디 신야데 또 베셔랍텔라다 나도리 바세고 나도리 바키 베셔랍.
More clearer way to understand this first type, the knowledge of Buddhism, is everything included in the 3 pitakas or the 3 baskets is included here. So the 3 pitakas of, if I remember correctly, it's Abhidhamma, wisdom, and the first one is it? Vinaya. Thank you. So the 3 pitakas of Vinaya, of Abhidhamma, and of wisdom. Yeah. So these are the 3 pitakas, and this includes all the teachings of the Buddha, and this is included in this major field of learning, that of Buddhism.
That dancing ribasedi, that's so jige garson jige dancing ribadela, nangpe dancing ribayore, chiribe dancing ribayore, chinanike dancing ribayore, that dancing ribas so bene Lam Rim Text Kiwigan Yimbi Trupche, Mainland, Mayimbi, Delia, Nujela Soba, Dingurua, Kiwachiwa Yomares, and Kiwachima Yubi Trupchi, Ripasam, the Ribo Tugada, Kiwachima Yomares, Delia Pa, and then Meva and the Kuan in it in the Yungri said, Jenigi Ribigi, Namsha, Javache de la Dancing Ripas, Dancing Ripa, and Nabi Dancing Ripa, Dancing Ripa, Nabi Dancing Ribadi. 대지 나네 나도 리번나로 주두고 유 이나도 로스 댄시 리서치 바셋 댄시 리바디 지난이가 나로 여러와 댄사 댄시 리바셋.
The second of the 5 major fields of learning is that of knowledge of logic and reason. Logic and reason then is included both within Buddhism and in non-Buddhist traditions. So we give an illustration of the cultivation of logic and reason within the Buddhist context would be how to establish that future lives exist, that there is such a thing as past and future lives. The general topic of past and future lives would be included in the previous knowledge, that of Buddhism, but how to establish it through reasoning is included here in the second of the 5 major fields of learning, that of logic and Buddhism, logic and reasoning, which is found both in Buddhist systems as well as non-Buddhist systems.
Jarik Base, Yigi Jotan, and the Daja, Sumda, Denigi, Dajig Ripati Ore. Jazan, Dajig Ripa Shanley, Pember to Blair, Dajig Ripa, Mayamashina, the Nipeji, Pejegi, Gode Yamashina, the Nation Pember to Matway, which is on Dajig Ripa, wishing what the Jarik Base Ore.
The third then is the knowledge of language. So this is studied so as to be able to not only read and comprehend well, but also to compose well, and thereby be of ever greater benefit to others. So that's the knowledge of language.
Mangujior was like so Lunga use Mukone Sovi, Rig Mambo, Denigo, Sovi, Rigba Chazan, Deniaco Kimba, Regas and Shanley Pember Duala, and Shanley Denigi Laga Legend, Pando Tuya, and Denigo Sovi Ripa Contishala, Lapchin, Pando Tuya, Digo Wenza, then sorry by Kimbaco Regime.
The fourth is the knowledge of technical arts. Here, this is because there's nothing that a bodhisattva will not strive to learn so as to be able to benefit others. This would include things, for example, engineering, construction, these kinds of skills, and the bodhisattva will strive to learn these in order to be able to benefit others.
Then Sawari Basi main direct is other Shangi Neju, Dunga Sea, the Neba, Menjuches, Dale, Mengi. Dishingo, Tizanda Shanley, Labiale, Mengi Sawari by Shingo, Tizandine, the Shandin Tubala, Sawari by the Shingo is.
And the final of the major fields of learning is that of medicine. Again, medicine is trained in so as to be of benefit to others.
Tizan Shanley Panda Tubala, the Negi Nangala Shingo, Chanjusembanamji, Chasadi, Dusin and Yamlin and Gore, the Dineza. The Nigi Yamlin Mana by Nijibinian, Lobsang Machine by Nasan Yoga to Mare.
Bodhisattva, as we saw at the first sentence of this section, is motivated by bodhicitta, and therefore they engage in these the cultivation of the 5 fields of learning in order to benefit others. And without knowledge, without extensive knowledge, Buddhahood is not possible.
Tizan Dode Gendala, Chizun Jamba Combe Song Big, Dode Gendana, Karasungorasne, Ribi Nenga Dala, Jumber Majena, Pacho Giga, Tamji Kenny, Migurties, Tizan, the Karsane, Ribi Nenga, Lobsang Majibana, Pabi Chok said that Papa de la Yandu Papa, Ranja Papa, Janjusim Papa, Janjusim by Naya, that. Papa Nana Yaksho de Janjusim just Janjusim Papa, Janjusim Papa to get Dibina, Lobsang Majiban, San Yogo to Mare, San Yogo, Tamji Kemba, Chasan Hingo, what is a Shangu Shandin Dubo, Shandin Dubala, Tamji Kengo, the Neza Ribinangala, the Nigi Kemba, Kaba Machabaina, San Yogo to Mares, and the Nigi that do you again the Sungudua.
Bodhisattva has the sincerest of motivations to become a Buddha for the sake of others, and therefore they engage in the accumulation of all forms of knowledge as is presented here. Then there's a quotation showing the importance of developing a broad form of knowledge. The quotations from the Uttara Tantra, from Sublime Continuum by Maitreya. Without striving in the 5 fields of learning, not even supreme bodhisattvas will develop omniscience. Without striving in the 5 fields of learning, not even supreme bodhisattvas will develop omniscience. So even Arya bodhisattvas will not be able to achieve enlightenment without studying broadly, without developing a broad range of skills, because the state of Buddhahood is the state of omniscience, the state of all-knowing. Therefore, the bodhisattva is striving to know all and needs to cultivate all forms of knowledge.
That is Simjing doing Jeba to be shut up, said then Digaresona, that's Cedelia, Simjelia, that was the Nigi, Lobjon de Jamba, Jane, Shangi doing Jehu, Shangi doing Jidu, Simjing doing Jiduga, Simjelia, Cedelia, Digi Tubia, 동화 세야기 탑람 가르가르 띵고바 디테네 그 참바 가르도 가르가르 또 띵고바 하고에 또 베시랍 안 데니게 냠네지도 깨와 치말라 디 냠네지바데 깨와 치말라 디네데 요야기 디 탑람 띵비기 시랍 디게 데니기 캠바즈랑기 캠비기 켄제 샬라 띵고자 데니기 하고가 또 베시랍 딜이야 ane semchigi duen cheba tobe sherab sikor, shengi duen shenle pambar tobe, shengi tiki tobe alaya, ande duxchini sherabki cheba jo, di la ko kapla kapsu di kola di tene yagado, kola di shere yagado, duxchini korongi kamdang webada tunbigi, korongla pandwa kari che yume duxsam dangje, ane kemba je, ane denegi deda semchigi duen cheba tobe sherab sikor, dine hagoya sherab dila.
That then is a brief presentation of the second of the threefold division of wisdom, the wisdom that knows the conventional. Then the third type, which is at the top of page 45. By means of those two, the wisdom that knows how to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings. So here the Bodhisattva has trained well in the ultimate, in the wisdom realizing emptiness, as well as broadly in the conventional. Now the third division is being skilled in how to interact with others, to guide others, to advise others in order to achieve both happiness in this life as well as to create the causes for happiness in future lives, in particular to create causes for liberation and enlightenment. So for example, an expression of this third type of wisdom will be the Bodhisattva skillfully guiding sentient beings to do this or not to do that, in accordance with their own individual personalities, in order to achieve happiness in either this life or future lives as well. So this is then an illustration of the third type of wisdom.
jihadi da sherab de gechi mo shure sa da sherab de le ang joge shengi tuen je balaya ane kunzo to be shera sa da simje tuen ji be shera sa de ko gore ane nga joge nyomo be zawa da zen mari ba pang balaya tong yu to be shera de ko do sherab de gechi mo shu yin sa da de wa shera nyam ne ja andi ma se dang ang joge jinbi nyam ne chu je nyam ne sui be nyam ne 가르쳐ben 삼대 냠네 쳐바나 전주의 냠나 삼대 냠제 셔랍디 셔랍주의나 아니 셔랍디게 냠네디 판도체 뉴버체 당도 거레스 베나가지 진비 냠네 쳐바이나 진비게 냠네 치디칼 셔랍기 삼체바체네 진바 가르 미칠레 진바 따바나 진바 가르따나 야가 요레 판도체 진바 진바 따위기 진바 따비기 가르 균 판연 가요레스 진바 마따바 세나 쳐바네 균 가고 거리 용거레스네 당아지 셔랍기 진바 마타에 세나 집이 유엔다 진바 따비 진비 유엔된디게 제바체 또베 셔랍디게 바나 셔랍기네 진비 냠네 잘래 판도 친부인 거래 근데 진바 따위 갑리네 셴리아 진비네 따위 갑리나 파줘들이야 가르 내가 콜이야 가르깔리깔리 강아체도 가르진의 판도 체 용서를 제바체 셔랍기 제바체네 콜이야 판도 체 두투에나 이 셔랍기 제바체반 하고도 그러와 제가 디네자 디 용거래 셔럽티기 진비 냠네데 디레 안디 마세 대신 아주기 진바사 진비 옹 진보 코롱 오려야 뎀바마두바 삼타야다 지제 진보 코롱 오 다신 제베스나 랑오이 두바 메세비기 뎀바마두바 삼타야 제자 데니기 두스치네 진바타야게 제대한 뎀바마두바레 진바타야게 스토예 셈바데 진바데 뎀바마두바레 디옹 기위기 제보 마오바데 제보데 뎀바마두바레 삼제 두스네 뎀바마두바 삼다베 셔르게 삼타잖데 진바디야 진바데 뱀마시게 뉴베체보 쇼도 규바차고레스 제자 데니기 진비기 냠는 델레 셔르피어바나 진비 냠네 니도 풍선 소바 차도야 디난 지벌다 진바 수준을 소바 준비 삼대 셔럽 삼대 차상 셔럽기 조진 제반에 디니기 콘조 냠렌티기야 뉴버 차다도 걸 제사 셔럽 세데 베마스 기에치 뭐 냠렌 가르체베네 아주 셔럽데 기에치 뭐 시우레스 근데 안 라바도 동바이 도베 셔라서 코르베 자와 빵바랑 아주 셔럽메나 빵토 말바 셔럽 기에치 뭐레 세데 당아 주기 삼대 신의 주베네 셔럽데 기에치 뭐레 제가 되네게 신의 죽차와네 한 동반일 미베 셔럽디 라도 셔럽겨 셔럽기 쳔보레 신의 마루녜레네 신의 주야라 로조디 셔럽고야 기쳔보레 제가 셔럽디 마시기 기쳔보 슈레사지 숨고 셔럽기 연된 시고요레세 숨고와
So hopefully, as we've looked at this topic, it's become abundantly clear just how important wisdom is. So just before I go on with what Genla is saying, just to remind what I mentioned in the first class, the English word wisdom is in other contexts the English words of intelligence or understanding or recognizing can be better. I think some cases the word wisdom is better, others intelligence or understanding, recognizing are better. So keep all of those different English words in mind as I used just the one word of wisdom, but all those other meanings are included in there. So now to go on with what Genla is saying. So wisdom is of great importance, whether it is the conventional wisdom or the ultimate wisdom. Both are of great importance. Therefore, we need to strive in developing our wisdom. So here we see developing our wisdom, developing our intelligence, our knowledge, because it's all the same word. We need to strive to develop our wisdom and to utilize wisdom in all our activities. This is of great importance. The greater our wisdom, the more benefit we can be to others. And in particular, to utilize our wisdom at all times. When we utilize our wisdom in, for example, the practice of the other 5 perfections, it enhances them exponentially. So, for example, how to utilize wisdom with the practice of generosity. So one thinks, who can I help here? This is using wisdom, our intelligence. Who can I help now? How best can I help them? What would be the benefit of helping this or these individuals? What would be the fault of not helping them? Do I have the ability? How best can I utilize my skills in this instance? So these are all illustrations of utilizing wisdom or our intelligence, our knowledge. And we can see then, to the extent that we utilize our wisdom before engaging the act of generosity, our act of generosity will have more effect, more benefit. The second way that wisdom should be utilized is when engaging in the act of generosity. And this is where one keeps in mind the emptiness of the 3 spheres. So this, again, I'll give the illustration with generosity, but can and should be used in all circumstances. So here, one keeps in mind that the substance that is being offered, so the generous, perhaps the thing that is being given or the help that is being given, that, the first, is empty of inherent existence. It doesn't exist in the way that it appears to consciousness. It is empty of inherent existence. That's the first sphere. The second, the act of generosity, which means the consciousness, the mind of generosity, the mind wanting to give, wanting to help, that consciousness too is empty of inherent existence. Thirdly, the person, whether the offerer or the one being offered to, is also empty of inherent existence. So to the extent that we can have the understanding of ultimate wisdom in manifest, this too enhances the practice of generosity. So this here, the second type, is an illustration of the wisdom that knows the ultimate. The first part was an illustration of the wisdom that knows the conventional, thinking about how best to help, who to help, utilizing my talents. That is the wisdom that knows the conventional. And the second type, being aware of emptiness, is the wisdom that knows the ultimate. So here, this shows just how important wisdom is in all contexts. Whatever we're doing, we need to utilize our intelligence, our wisdom. And it's required in all contexts. So for those who are striving to develop calm abiding, one utilizes wisdom prior to embarking on the stages to develop calm abiding, gathering knowledge. Whilst one is developing calm abiding, one utilizes aspects of wisdom, and once one has developed calm abiding, one continues to utilize calm abiding now with the consciousness of wisdom. So therefore, at all stages of our training, Wisdom is of paramount importance.
Alright, that is the some diaries and the Kovi Gudi, that Dambo, Nyomoba, Neck, Dasen Mariba, Na, Sibe, Dasen Tiki, and Diwangi, me, the Chehos a big intention, as you get Gavasa, Leki, Sai, Migi, Lesa, and the lady and Dusine, Basha, Washan, and Jelia, that Seba Lemba Siba, then the Kiawa and Dusine, Markova Kiawaling, Gudi did his Chesandan to get Leda Numo on Kiawalingure, said the Gudi, Le said, the Niki Kivile, Migawali, Ineda, Kiawalindu Kabla, Seba the Lempa in Numo Bade, Tangan Kiwi. Kunino doesn't marrying body or Nomo body, Dele Nomo Sum, so Kiwi Lady Chavena, Nomo Sum Ligore, that Gudilla, that Migi Chavena, that's a deca so simple sausage because Migua Ligore, Chesadinesa, Tanga the Leda, Nomo, but Kissel, Leda, Le Sadding on Zugile, Yawachima, Hada, me, Dundrokaraki, and Yeg, Le Saban, Simji Samba the chair. Chesadi Tambo Junior Mopatida, Tense Mari Patiche. And Nibo Mari Nomo Batella, Seba the Lemba Idice, or Desolate in Azuko, Kiawalingore. That desolate in a Kiawalimbi Pumbo de la, that Chawadu Dunga Lagores and Pumbo de Chawadu. Gudinichile Dene, Dupti Pumbo de la Suyu Pumbo de la Chawadu Dunga Lagores, Chawadu Dunga. Jesnada, Denegi tell Dupti Pumbo Dupsavicella, then the Subo de la Naya Yungore, Saya Yungore, Jesna Juatro Jin Nazat Mambuligore, Jesna, Deni. And there's Dewal in Lamsang, Dewa the Gurche, Dunga, Juadi, Dunga said the Ungores. Then in Zadang, Gudi, Mazuka, Ganga, di Meba, Servala, Dambo Gudi Meba Sugores. You never say Gudi Garrison, Leda Nomoba, Nomoba Meba Sugores. Leda Nomoba said that's our Gudi, Denzin Maripad, Na said, Temple Denzin Maripad Meba Survaina. Deep Pangu Maranzu, Tombani, Toba in there. Tombani Toba, some Toba in Tombani Toba, Combi, Wangi, Denzin di Pang Matuba in there, Mazuki, Nomo, but Kovaliki, lay Nomo, but Sagoma, Kovaliki, and the Lesa, Satugoma, Carson, could nibble mass on the Chunju Sarwa, Satugoma. Tinenza, Tony Toba, the kitchen, Bures, the Casamanda, and you share the Benyaminji Cablea, and you Kovaliki, and by some time that Tony Toba kitchen Bore. And the main biggest young Azuki, she ended Shengi Dun Tuyala, Tarbatamji, Sanjoko Tobalaya, then they don't want you to come with Gomje, Senior Trupti, Tene, Shila Sondes, Gomje, that thing on the Yomo Saban Pasha, the Jepapangoza, don't you talk with him sent it, said Azuda, so already during some time, in the next jet, Koal. Leda Nomo, Kiawalimbi Kumbo said the Kanishki Gure, Gudinichli Kihan de Lagore, everything on say how Chagorwa, the name that Anzuki, Gusaya delia, and the Pesucha Kichmochagore, then as I did the ringing Sud, Yatinich, that's on Jamadela, the Jerum Chigita, the Tichish to Adi Mashi, didn't it?
To end then with summarizing what we've looked at tonight, I started presenting tonight the process by which we take uncontrolled rebirth. This process that we've endured or undertaken lifetime after lifetime since beginningless time. This process that all ordinary beings find themselves trapped in. And this process starts with a root cause of the ignorance of self-grasping that grasps at the self as existing by way of its own nature. And from this concept of I immediately follows a concept of mine. And from these two then comes the accumulation of karma. Whether the karma that is accumulated is virtuous or non-virtuous, it starts off or is preceded by, or is rather based on, ignorance. So therefore, both virtuous and non-virtuous karma is accumulated in dependence on the ignorance of self-grasping. And then, therefore, the karma that is accumulated is contaminated by, at very least, the ignorance of self-grasping. And it may well be contaminated, in the case of non-virtuous karma, by other afflictions such as anger or pride and so forth. then the accumulated karma, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, it leaves an imprint, or rather a seed, on consciousness. And at the time of death, and that this process then continues continuously throughout one's life, and at the time of death, one imprint ripens. It ripens, first, craving and grasping arises, grasping at a feeling tone, a pleasant or unpleasant one, and then an imprint ripens, independent on that, right at the time of death, with the third link of existence or becoming, and rebirth is propelled. So in this process of death, where there are 6 of the 12 links that are propelling the next death, those of ignorance, karma, consciousness, craving, grasping, and existence, 3 of those are afflictions, namely ignorance, craving, and grasping. So these 3 are all afflictions. And whether the imprint, and if the imprint that is ripened is a virtuous one, rebirth is taken in an upper realm as a human again, or as a god, or if that imprint that is ripened is a non-virtuous one, rebirth is taken in the lower realms. Thereafter then, tonight, came to look at wisdom in particular. And we looked at wisdom in this context because it's the development of the wisdom realizing emptiness, that first division that we looked at in detail last week, that breaks this cycle of uncontrolled rebirth, because it's the wisdom realizing emptiness that eliminates the root cause, the ignorance of self-grasping. And that, whilst we looked at it in detail last night, we look tonight then at the other divisions of wisdom, all of which are required by the Bodhisattva in order to be of great benefit to others, and thereby to achieve their goal of becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. And the reason, again, for looking at wisdom tonight is because, again, I got my sequence a bit mixed, so we're going to go back a little bit here. The reason for looking at wisdom tonight is because this process of uncontrolled rebirth, which leads to us taking these contaminated aggregates, physical and mental aggregates, the body that came about independent on the fertilized egg, and then the consciousness that came in here, independent on our own propulsion from afflictions, means our aggregates are contaminated and therefore are an illustration of all pervasive suffering. The mere attainment of these physical and mental aggregates are pervaded by suffering because the causes are contaminated. And therefore, we have the basis upon which we experience the other 2 types of suffering, the first 2 types of suffering, that of physical and mental pain and transient pleasure. So therefore, because this process of uncontrolled rebirth leads to continued suffering, this is the wheel that we need to break, and it's only done through realizing emptiness, the direct antidote to ignorance. And to the extent that we cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, we will be able to initially weaken the ignorance grasping at the self and eventually eradicate it. As we weaken the ignorance, we weaken the strength of the resulting afflictions and the strength of the non-virtuous karma accumulated. And when it's eradicated, the ignorance of self-grasping is eradicated by wisdom, uncontrolled rebirth in samsara ends, and it ends completely. So therefore, the cultivation of wisdom is of greatest importance, and not just the wisdom realizing emptiness, although that is of the greatest importance. All forms of wisdom or knowledge need to be cultivated so that we can be of benefit to others. So that in brief is what we looked at tonight. Next week, we'll conclude this section with looking at the summary verse from Lama Tsongkhapa from his Song of Spiritual Experience. So we'll conclude there then for tonight.